Hey, hi, hello, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the 10 books that I would keep if for some reason I could only keep 10. Putting these in order. So narrowing down this list was really hard. It was actually harder than I thought it was going to be. There were several books on here that I really wanted to include, but they just didn't make the cut because I was being pretty ruthless in cutting it down to 10. I have a wide range of variety on these books, from middle grade to adult, from romance to murder mystery to fantasy. So let's talk about the first one. So the first book I would keep if I could only keep 10 books is The One and Only Ivan by Katherine Applegate. And the reason I would keep this book is actually different than you might think. I actually have never read this book in its entirety before. But the reason I would keep it is because during my student teaching in college, this was my cooperating teacher's favorite book. It was a third grade classroom and she would always read this book to her classmates. So we actually didn't read it while I was student teaching because she wanted to save it for the second half of the year when she was going to read it to them because she loved them that much. But she did give me a copy of the book, and on my very last day, she had, here, I'll show you. She had all of the students sign it for me. So they presented this to me on my last day when I was student teaching right before I graduated, and it was very touching and very heartwarming. So this book will always be in my collection just because it was such a heartwarming and a lovely gift. It made me cry. I will always cherish those times with those students and that cooperating teacher because of this. The next book I would keep is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This book blew up during the height of the pandemic. Was it released during the pandemic? Let me check. It was released in 2019, but it blew up. I saw it blow up during the height of the pandemic. So getting my hands on a copy of this was extremely hard. It was out of stock pretty much anywhere I looked online. I tried to do, drive-by pickup, to which the lengths that you could during the spring of 2020 to find it. I think I eventually ended up finding it somewhere, either on Amazon. I don't remember where I found it, but it took me a couple weeks to get my hands on this book. And then, how did she found my hair tie? Hold, please. Finding a copy of this book was extremely hard. So I think I finally ended up finding it somewhere online, and then because of the way shipping was going on at the time, it took a couple weeks to get in. I would keep this book on my shelves because it is probably my favorite contemporary romance I've ever read. It was really only like the first... My cat's testing my patience today. It was such a fun read, and by the time I got my hands on it, I was so excited to read it, and I just devoured it in probably only a day or two. I'm sure you've heard of this book, but if you haven't, it's about Alex and Henry, Alex is the first son to the US president, and Henry is the Prince of England, and it is about their friendship kind of... I wouldn't consider this enemies to lovers. I'd consider this like rivals to lovers. It's funny, it's witty. This book was so fun and easy to read, and just the banter between Alex and Henry just the characters jump off the page. I really love it. And I've read many more contemporary romances since I read this one 3 years ago, but it still remains probably one of my favorites. So that's why I would keep this one. The next book out of my collection I would keep is Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake. This book is about Astrid and Jordan, and Astrid is an interior designer and Jordan is the, I think, head contractor, and they are working together to remodel and redesign Jordan's family's inn. This is the second book in the, I think it's called Bright, like the Bright Falls series, because I think the city they live in is called Bright Falls. If I'm wrong, I will put it on the screen. But this is the second book next to Delilah Green Doesn't Care, and I actually had a really hard time picking between this one and that one because I absolutely loved them both. But I ended up relating a little bit more to the characters in this one, so that's why I picked it. If Red, White, and Royal Blue is one of my favorites of all time, this is my favorite of all time. Those two, I have a hard time picking favorites. How do you pick favorites? I don't know. But this is definitely up there. So this book is about the relationship that develops between Astrid and Jordan, and there's a subplot of them kind of working through what they want their careers to look like, and it was just really relatable to me. I loved reading about the redesign and all of the descriptions of what the rooms would look like and the plans, and yeah, Ashley Herring Blake was really descriptive, and I could just envision what these rooms would look like, and it was just absolutely beautiful. I wanted to live in this world and see what the looked like in real life. And if you didn't know, Ashley Herring Blake has a Pinterest where she has different boards for each of her 3 books in this series. The third one's not out yet, but she has one for all of them where she pins like what she thinks the characters would look like, and just models or, you know, other people that look similar to the characters that looks like, and then even just kind of like the vibes of each book. And she pins, for this one, she pins Victorian homes that I think gave her inspiration for this. And it's just, they're really fun to go and look at if you've read the books, because then it makes it picturing, and it just makes it more immersive, and it makes picturing it even easier. So I highly recommend checking that out, and I highly recommend reading both Lila Green Doesn't Care and Astrid Parker. But if I had to choose to save one, it would be this one. The next book I would keep is Heartstopper by Alice Osman. This is a graphic novel about Nick and Charlie, who are 2 people who sit in class together and form a friendship, which ultimately turns into more. This book is like something warm and cozy, and soup comes to mind, but it's not soup because soup is messy. Well, yeah, maybe soup, I don't know. But I love this book. It was my first foray, if you will, into graphic novels, and since then I have read quite a few more, but I don't know how you could not love this book. I don't know a single person that has said that they didn't enjoy this book. There are currently 4 editions, volumes, that's the word I'm looking for. There are currently 4 volumes out right now. The 5th one I think comes out this year, and then the 6th one, Alice, the author, actually announced that the 6th one will be the last one that will be published into these bind-ups. And if for some reason you don't know, but there is also a Netflix TV show which currently has 1 season out and are contracted for 3 seasons, so I highly recommend watching that. It's one of the best book to show adaptations I've ever seen. The casting is spot on, the characters, and then I think the author actually drew some of the little doodles in the TV show. It's very heavily involved, is what I'm trying to say. So it's just, it's like this come to life. And that's exactly what you want when you have a book to TV show adaptation. So I highly recommend this entire series. I highly recommend the TV show. I would absolutely keep this if I could only pick 10 books. So the next book that I would keep, I believe I found while searching Amazon one day, and it was listed under, if you liked Legendborn, then you'll like this. That combined with the cover absolutely made me buy it. So the next book is This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron. And I mean, just look at this cover. It's, I mean, 100% cover by, it's absolutely beautiful. This is a young adult fantasy book. It also has like gothic vibes in it. There's Greek mythology in it. There's, you know, gardens and plant magic, and, you know, old kind of creepy houses, and, you know, a romance and secrets. And I don't know what there isn't in this book. If you like fantasy, you like young adults. I don't even really like Greek mythology. I like it in certain aspects, but it's just done so well in here. This book is about Bree, who lives in Brooklyn with her 2 moms who run a plant store. And Bree has the gift, I think, of making plants grow. Let me check. I believe she has the gift of making plants grow. Bree has a gift. With a single touch, she can grow plants from tiny seeds to rich blooms. Absolutely. Yes, exactly. And the other part of her gift is that poisonous plants don't affect her. So when Bree's aunt dies, she gets a mysterious, basically, letter from her aunt saying that her aunt is giving her this house out in the countryside somewhere. So her and her moms, who they all need a break from the city, they all go and live there, where Bree discovers kind of this secret garden full of poisonous plants that only she can enter because of this gift that she has. So once she gets to the house, she discovers that there's secrets, and maybe there's more to this house and this garden and this town than she originally thought. So I highly recommend this one. It's really great. There's also a sequel. Unfortunately, it's not as good, but this one, I mean, it's absolutely worth it to just read this one or read the duology just because of this one. It's one of my favorite books ever. I think this is turning into more to me just fangirling about my favorite books than talking about why I would keep this book. But I would keep this book because it's one of my favorite books of all time. It's one of my favorite fantasies. I don't love urban fantasies, and this one was done really well. So anytime that there's a certain genre that I don't enjoy, that I find a favorite book of all time in that genre, I think it's important to keep, because it means that I think it was done really well. The next book is one I've actually already mentioned, and that is, I always have to look down to remember the name of the author. If you haven't noticed already, I am crap at remembering authors' names. The next book I have actually already mentioned, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I'm sure you've already heard of this book. It is everywhere on the internet right now and has been, I think, probably for a couple years. But this book is about a girl named Bree, I believe. This one is also a young adult fantasy, but this one has elements of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table in it, which I didn't think I'd enjoy at all, but similar to other books I've already mentioned, this was also one of my favorite books that I've ever read. It's about Bree, who after her mom died in a car crash when she was 16, she goes to, is it North Carolina Chapel Hill? Is it a real college? Yeah. She goes to UNC Chapel Hill to study as in this world, they have a program for high school, for like really smart high school kids. I don't know if they have that in real life. But so she goes to stay at UNC Chapel Hill for this program of really smart kids. And there she discovers kind of a secret society. And she also discovers that maybe she has some type of magic, maybe more than one type of magic, and it's just kind of her. I don't want to say too much. So I'm keeping this one because it was the first time that I had picked up a young adult fantasy in a long time, probably. I read this in either 2020 or 2021, I don't remember, but it was the first time I had picked up a young adult fantasy since like 2017. Well, my camera stopped recording, so, oh man, I had gotten through full. That's so frustrating. Well, okay. So the last book we talked about was Legendborn, and the reason that I'm keeping this book is because it reignited my love for YA fantasy. I don't remember if I already said that about This Poison Heart. No, I had already read this one. So if I did, I lied. It reignited my love for YA fantasy. I hadn't read anything like it at the time. It's YA urban fantasy. I don't tend to pull towards YA urban fantasy, so this was just done really well. The next book we're going to talk about is something that's purely for nostalgia reasons, and that is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. This book, it's the first. I don't think I need to explain the plot to you. I think it's pretty well known out there. But this book was the first fandom that I ever remember being involved in. I took this book to band camp with me. We all were reading it. You know, everyone in my bunk was, you know, in my kind of cabin. We were all reading it at the same time. We were talking about it. I remember dragging my husband, or my boyfriend, who's now my husband, to the movies. It was such a cultural moment. Is that dramatic to say? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was. And you can just see like how many times I've loved this book. This book came everywhere with me for a while. It was my original copy. There's probably tear stains. No, not on this one. In New Moon. But it's just, this book is obviously very well loved. It was the original copy that I read. It was such a fandom at the time. It was huge. I mean, we were making t-shirts. So I don't know how I could ever get rid of this. I mean, you know, this represented like my senior year of high school, going from summer of going into senior year of high school. So why am I showing you the back? That's just what it is. I mean, that's why I'm keeping it, is because of the nostalgia. All right, and the last fantasy and the last fantasy book I have that I would keep is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is another one where I don't know if I need to describe the plot to you, but very quickly, if you've never read it or heard of it for some reason, it is about Feyre, who is a 19-year-old human who has to hunt for her family to survive, and one day she goes deeper into the forest because it's winter, and she has to go deeper into the forest, closer to the wall that divides the fairy lands from the human lands, and she ends up killing a fae who's disguised as a wolf. And so because she killed that fae, a fae comes to her home and basically takes her for a life, and it's about her in that world. It's a very brief synopsis. It is probably a very bad synopsis. It's basically Beauty and the Beast retelling. Some of you are probably asking, why would you keep this one and not A Court of Mist and Fury? And I agree with you. However, the reason I would keep this one is because this one is signed. And it's the original hardcover. I also have the new paperbacks. And you know what? I like these covers. I don't care what anybody says. I think these are fun. And I think they're nostalgic, and they represent how I felt during the time that I read them. When I picked this book up, I was weirdly into anything Beauty and the Beast at the time, so this was a, you know, easy buy for me. But I was kind of just figured out what booktube was, and I found somebody who was hosting a book club through Goodreads, and they were reading this book. It was my first Sarah J Maas book ever. I had no idea what Throne of Glass was. I had no idea that this was not a standalone. I thought it was a standalone, and if you know how this ends, then it's kind of weird that I thought that, but I quickly figured out that it wasn't. And this was the first time I had ever read something like this. I don't know if I had ever really read, I'm looking at my books, I don't know if I had ever really read, I didn't know what fae was. I'd never read something that was kind of this high fantasy. Either way, I had never read something like this before when I read it. I read it on release day, and I just remember being so fascinated, and it was so fun. I read it so fast. And you know what? I did root for Tamlin, but hey, you know, we didn't know any better at the time, right? And I still think he deserves a redemption arc, so I said what I said. Anyway, this book holds a lot of memories for me. When I read it, it wasn't the best time in my life, and this was a bright, shining spot to just be able to dive into this book and kind of get lost. So I don't care if you disagree with me. A Court of Mist and Fury, is it a better book? Yes. Is the outcome better? Yes. Would I keep both? Would I ever get rid of my other copy of A Court of Mist and Fury? No, absolutely not. I own 2 copies of every book in this series. But this one, it's signed. It's the thing that got me into it, and I'm keeping it. I'm not sorry. This is still recording. Yes, good. Okay. So for the final 2, we're going to switch to a different genre. We're going to switch to some mystery. And the first one that I have is Finlay Donovan is Killing It by El Casamino. I had to look at the name because they're all kind of similar. But this is another one where you've probably heard of it. I don't care. These are all great. And you should absolutely read it, and I'm not getting rid of this. The first time I listened to this book, the first time I read this book, it was on audiobook, and binged this. Was the second one out at the time? Yes, I think so. But it was the first I've ever read of an adult mystery. I think it was the first adult mystery I've ever read. It was definitely the first time I had ever like discovered the genre of a cozy mystery where it's not scary, it's not gory. There's on-page violence, but it's not like scary or creepy or gross or whatever. So it's honestly funny. It's so funny. The way am I on a first name basis with her? Then the way the author captured, okay, hold on. Let me collect my thoughts. Finlay Donovan is about a single mom of 2 who was recently divorced. She's looking for money. She's not looking for, like she's strapped for cash. She's an author, and one day she's talking with her editor at a Panera, pitching, kind of this next book, and someone overhears her and thinks that she's a hit woman for hire. So she slips a note with like a name, a price, and a phone number into her diaper bag, which Elle discovers when she leaves the Panera. And because she's strapped for cash, she considers it. So you have to read the book to find out what happens. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but this book is hilarious. It's funny. The way Elle captured what little children are like. I'm not a mom, so I can't speak to that, but I did work in preschool for 10 years, so I know what it's like to have, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old around all day. And it's just, the characters are so funny. Every character is so funny. The relationship between Finlay and Vero, her nanny / best friend / partner in crime, is just hilarious. Their banter is funny. There's romance in it if you like that kind of thing. I mean, I do, but it's so funny. It's the best cozy mystery I've ever read. Does it follow the exact kind of like pattern and tropes of cozy mysteries? No, but I think that's what makes it great. It's slightly different, you don't always know what you're going to get in it. Currently there are 3 books out. I believe there is a 4th one coming out. Much like every other book that's on this list, it was the first time I read a genre and I ended up falling in love with that genre, or it's the best of the genre. I would absolutely keep this book in my collection forever. I would only, if I could only keep 10, it would be this one, because I could reread it and it would still be funny every single time I read it. So that is why I'm keeping it. And the last book on this series is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. And if you know, this series is also extremely popular, and it's for good reason. It's because it's amazing. The first and the third book are some of the best books I've ever read. And I know I'm saying that about every list, but that's why they're on this list, is because they are the books that I would keep if I could only keep 10. And it's the second book is really good too. It's one of the better YA mysteries I've ever read, but it's not as good as the first and the third. But I still think you need to read all three. The second one is kind of a separate mystery, but they all go together. So read all three of them. Get them from your library. Get the audiobooks. Buy them, whatever, own them in multiple copies. I do, I think. This book is about Pip, who is a senior in high school, and she's working on her senior capstone project, which in this series, or in this book, she is working on a cold case. I don't know if it's a cold case. I think there was a murder in her town where a boyfriend murdered his girlfriend and then killed himself. But for some reason, Pip doesn't believe that's true. I can't remember why she doesn't think that's true, but she doesn't think it's true, so she decides to look into it for her senior capstone project. And in doing so, she kind of gets herself a little too involved, and things start to go haywire, and all the good things that make reading a book interesting. Holly Jackson is an absolute genius. If you've read the entire series and you got to the 50% mark in the third book and you're like, how is there 50% more left in this book? Then you know what I'm talking about. I don't know how she got away with it. Good for her. I think it's amazing. This is probably my favorite book series of all time ever. That's saying a lot because I don't like to pick favorites. And I picked this one as opposed to the third one because I think it's important to have the first in the series. Would I pick all three? Yeah, I would. But we're picking 10 books here, so this is the book I would pick. It's just so good. I have notes. I'm just rambling. What are my notes? So this book is the best mystery I've ever read. I've read a lot of young adult mysteries at this point. I've read a lot after this. I've read a lot of cozy mysteries, and this one is done the best. Holly Jackson leaves you clues throughout the book, even that go into multiple series. She kind of leaves Easter eggs throughout the series. You don't get 50 pages of an info dump at the end of the book like with some mystery series, if you know what I'm talking about. Honestly, it's probably more than one, so pick one. But you don't get a big info dump at the end that explains everything. She leads you down a path. Sometimes that path twists and turns. There's no big shock. The reveals make sense, but it's still, there's still twists. It's not shocked where did that come from? It's shocked holy crap, this is insane. It's just so good. I don't know how many times I can say that. I also highly recommend the audiobook. With most audiobooks, you listen to it, you walk, you clean, you go for a walk, you play video games, color, I don't know. I do a lot, build Legos, do a lot of things while I'm listening to audiobooks. But with this one, during this audiobook, I would find myself just laying on my couch listening to what was happening because of how intense it was, or because it was just so good, or I was just lost in the world. The way the audiobook is done is really well. There's podcast clippings, there's case files, interview recordings, and the audio changes so it sounds like you're listening to a podcast during those podcast clips. It sounds like you're listening to a interview recording when you're listening to those clips. The dynamics and the background noise, it all changes, and it's just so immersive. And honestly, it's the best audiobook I've ever listened to. This is probably the best young adult mystery I've ever read, and it's just, I could go on and on and on, but I won't. So that's why I would keep this one. So after I put this list together, I realized that a lot of these books are on here because they're either the first time or the first time in a long time that I had read something of that genre that I just absolutely fell in love with or was done really well. Or they're books of a certain genre that I wouldn't normally enjoy that I ended up falling in love with because of the way that it was done within that genre. Also, a lot of these books are newer, which surprised me. A lot of them I've read since 2020, and I've been involved in the book community and online book, world since probably 2015. So the fact that most of these have come out or I've read in the last 3 years was really interesting to me. Now, 2020 is the year that I had gotten back into reading a lot of a lot of fiction after taking a break for a couple of years. So in that sense, it's not surprising, but I do love that a lot of my favorites, in a sense, have come you know, from reading in the last 3 years. So let me know in the comments down below which books you would keep if you could only keep 10 in your collection. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!